Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we are taking a look at the Russian Makarov pistol, just the standard normal version of the Makarov. We'll go on in future videos later to look at some of the other countries that produce copies of the Makarov and some of the odd and interesting variations on it. But for today, just the standard pistol, where it came from, and more importantly, why. I think there are a lot of interesting questions out there that people have about why the Makarov? Like, why is it in a non-standard cartridge? Why was it adopted? What was it intended to do? And once you understand the background context of the Makarov, the answers to these questions make lots of sense. Let's put this in perspective. We're in 1945. With the end of World War II, the Soviet Union, like many other countries, has put together a plan to completely renovate its small arms inventory. They have a new rifle, a new pistol, a new submachine gun, the works. Now, I think one of the key questions about the Makarov is why is it in this unique proprietary cartridge? Makarov ammunition is 9 by 18 millimeter, and it's not the standard 9 millimeter bullet that we're used to in the rest of the world. It's not a .355 or .354 inch bullet, it's a .363. It is actually 9.2 millimeters. And the question is, well, why didn't they use a standard? And the answer is because pistol ammunition is typically interchangeable with submachine gun ammunition. That's why you have a 9mm parabellum pistol for your 9mm parabellum submachine guns. And with the new post-World War II Soviet small arms plan, that was no longer relevant. See, the new Soviet rifle was the SKS, chambered for 7.62 by 39. The new Soviet submachine gun to replace the PPShs and the PPS 43s was the Kalashnikov. Kalashnikov was originally developed as a submachine gun. That's why it was full auto, that's why it had a large magazine, and it was primarily intended to be issued to specialist troops, elite troops, airborne mechanized troops, where the standard line infantry were getting SKS rifles. So if that's your submachine gun, you're obviously not going to chamber your sidearm for 7.62 by 39. You've already got your ammunition interchangeability with the rifles. The sidearm is now subject to a whole different set of requirements. What the Soviets had found during World War II issuing the Tokarev pistols is that the Tokarev was kind of awkwardly large and heavy, not tremendously so, but bigger than it needed to be because it was overpowered. The 7.62 Tokarev cartridge was way more powerful than it needed to be for a handgun. What the Soviets found was no one who was actually, first off, you almost never used the handgun in combat. When you did, the accuracy that people were actually able to get with handguns was pretty poor. You didn't have competitive pistol marksman champions out there, you know, plinking German soldiers at 50 or 75 meters with their Tokarev handguns. No, you were lucky to hit someone at 10 yards with your sidearm. And in fact, the pistols were almost caused as many friendly casualties as enemy casualties. And I don't mean for, you know, the stereotypical Russian blocking operation sort of reason. I mean because Tokarevs had a lot of accidental discharges. There's absolutely no mechanical safety on the Tokarev short of the half-cock notch. And the Soviets had a lot of guys who accidentally shot themselves with their Tokarev pistols. This is understandable. This, especially by the end of the war, there were a lot of conscripts in the army, not a lot of long-term training, and a pistol that is legitimately unsafe to handle when loaded because it has no safety on it. So the priorities for the new Soviet pistol in the 1950s, or late 1940s, were it needed to be small, light, and compact, because the vast majority of the time what you're going to do with the pistol is stick it in your holster and carry it, and nothing else. It needed to have stopping power, but only at very limited range. And when this was, let's ignore the modern day take on how one determines the terminal effectiveness of bullets. In the 1940s, this was determined in the Soviet Union to be primarily a function of bore diameter. The big bullet is going to have the stopping power we need. A big bullet traveling relatively slowly will have stopping power, but only at short range. That is exactly the combination they wanted for the Makarov, and hence they developed a 9mm cartridge for it, but they're going to make a 9mm cartridge based on standard Soviet, or standard, in this case, Russian, nomenclature and design criteria, which is the bore diameter is just nominal, and if anything, it is actually measured by the interior diameter of the lands in the barrel. That's the groove, or the protrusions that stick into the barrel to actually cause the bullet to twist. In the West, we typically measure things by the groove diameter, the large diameter of the barrel. A 9mm inside diameter equates to approximately 9.2 millimeters in a Makarov. Hence, the bullet diameter is 363, but it's called 9mm because the interior diameter of the lands is 9mm. It is irrelevant that that's non-standard because this is the only weapon. Well, there are two weapons that this cartridge would be used in, but they were developed simultaneously side by side, that being the Makarov and the Stechkin automatic pistol. It doesn't need to be used in submachine guns. It's never going to be because the submachine gun is now the AK. So Soviet Union's not looking to buy surplus ammo from other people. They're going to make all their own ammo. It literally doesn't matter if it's not the same bullet diameter that other people are using. That's where the 9mm Makarov cartridge comes from. That's why it was developed. So, the pistol itself was designed by one Nikolay Makarov. He was born in 1914. He was educated at Tula in 1936 to 1941. In 1941, he actually went to work in a factory building PPSh submachine guns. He was promoted from foreman to senior foreman to chief design engineer at the factory, and at the end of the war he was actually working on an improved version of the PPSh 41 submachine guns. The end of the war made that irrelevant because AK is going to take over instead, and he is moved to a design bureau where he develops the Makarov pistol. So let's take a closer look at what this pistol actually is and how it works, and then we'll talk about where it went. The fundamental requirements of this pistol were that it be inexpensive, safe, and essentially light and handy. So Makarov does a pretty good job combining all these elements. The cartridge design certainly helps him by having a cartridge that is basically just a smidge more powerful than 380 ACP. He is able to design a pistol that has a simple blowback mechanism. That makes it inexpensive. Before we take it apart here to show you that, let me point out that this does have a number of significant safety improvements over the Tokarev. Also, handling, like the gun's easier to actually use and shoot than the Tokarev, largely because it is double action. So you don't have to do anything upon drawing this from a holster except pull the trigger. Now, it is a quite heavy trigger, but again, they had pretty minimal expectations for combat accuracy with the gun. So a heavy double action trigger is more important because it is a safety element that makes it much more difficult to accidentally shoot yourself with the gun than trying to get competition marksmanship out of these pistols. In addition to the double action trigger, there is also a combined safety and decocker here. So of course red is the fire position. If I push this up into the safe position, it automatically decocks the hammer and locks the trigger and hammer. So again, I can't accidentally shoot myself with the pistol. It is a pretty darn compact little gun. It's relatively light, weighs in at, I think, 730 grams unloaded. And it comes with a pretty simple flap holster. This covers up all aspects of the pistol, does a really good job of protecting it. You've got your spare magazine held here. You've got your cleaning rod, which has a little screwdriver tip on it as well. The markings on different Makarovs will vary by country of production. This one is Russian, which is fairly scarce. So we have an arrow in a triangle here. This is the symbol of the Izhevsk arsenal, which is where all of the Makarovs were manufactured. We have serial number in 3 places, the slide, the frame, and the safety lever only being the actual digits. There's a 2-letter prefix on the serial numbers here that will include Cyrillic letters, of course. We have a date of manufacture as well. Now, manufacture actually began in 1951, but the early pistols used a letter date code instead of actually writing the date of manufacture. Here is an example that is an M date. I believe that is 1960, and this is one of the very last ones. In the 1960s, they transitioned to just writing the date of manufacture on the gun. There were no original markings on the other side. What you will typically find is an importer mark on the side here. It's interesting, these are Russian guns. You saw the Izhevsk arsenal marking, but they were imported mistakenly as, or combined with, it's a little unclear, Makarovs from East Germany. and East German ones were legal to import. Russian ones technically were not supposed to be importable into the United States, but these showed up. That's why they're marked German. You will also find the serial number stamped on the back of the magazines. The pistols were issued with 2 magazines, and they are in fact both stamped with the serial number, and the number 1 mag and the number 2 mag are individually marked. Later in production, they stop stamping the serial numbers and they start just electro-penciling the serial number onto either the side or sometimes the back of the magazine. Disassembly is very easy. Fundamentally the same sort of system as the Walther PP or PPK. Certainly that was a gun that the Russians had lots of exposure to. Makes sense that Makarov would have had one of those, several of those, and used them as a starting point for his design. That's how firearms design is in the 20th century. You're largely copying pre-existing good ideas. So to disassemble this, we're going to pull the trigger guard down and rest it off to the side there. You do need to make sure that the gun is in the fire position because you will need to cock the hammer. The next step for disassembly is you just pull the slide back, up, and off the front of the barrel. So there's your slide. The recoil spring nests around the barrel. The barrel is fixed to the frame because it's just a simple blowback pistol. The one further step in disassembly is just to take off the grips, which are held in place by a single screw on the back. Notice that there is a little spring-loaded detent in the bottom, in the grips themselves, and that snaps into the 4 little semicircular notches in the screw, so that prevents the screw from rotating free while the gun's being carried or fired. Other than that, it's basically a wraparound grip, much like a Walther. We've got a 5-pointed star and the red Bakelite. This is indicative of Russian production military grips. And then there's the frame of the pistol. Not a whole lot going on here. We've got a flat spring for the hammer and trigger. The magazine release is a heel release that is connected to the bottom of that same spring. So the magazines themselves hold 8 cartridges, single stack, not a whole lot to them. There are 2 variations. Note that there is a little tab here connected to the follower that activates the hold open. So when the magazine is empty, the slide will lock open on the gun. And so you need to accommodate that tab at the bottom. On the early production magazines, they actually stamped the magazine body up to give space for that little blade to slide in when the magazine's fully loaded. On later production magazines, they just had a cutout stamped in the body for that little blade to slide down through. So those are your 2 versions. And then the Russian pistol production was essentially unchanged over the course of about 30-some years. Really, the only substantial, externally visible difference in production is that early on they serialized the safety levers, and later production they did not. No. By the way, the safety levers often have a reddish, sort of a plum tinge to them. That just comes from different alloy and different heat treat combination than some of the more pressure-bearing parts like the slide. So there you have the PM Pistolet Makarov, a gun that was light, handy, convenient, reasonably powerful at short range, and really did a very good job of meeting all of the Soviet military requirements for a new standard sidearm. Something on the order of 5 to 10 million Makarovs have been manufactured. They were manufactured by a variety of different countries. The Soviet Union, China made them, Bulgaria made them, East Germany made them, and then there are a number of other Warsaw Pact nations that made very similar pistols. They aren't strict copies, but same cartridge and same fundamental mechanical system. They're very common out there still. They're still in widespread use. Manufacture ended for military guns in Russia in the 1980s. Commercial production continued through the 1990s. There's lots of commercial ones out there. Original, actual Russian military Makarovs are really quite scarce in the United States. We have these, well, you saw there. They were imported mistakenly as East German pistols. So overall, it's a gun that doesn't get a lot of attention, I think, today as a really particularly interesting military pistol, largely because so many of them were imported that they seem commonplace. But in reality, this, I think, is a really interesting take on military sidearms. It's got a great piece of world and specifically military history to it, and they're really neat guns. So, as I said at the beginning, we will follow this up in the future with some more specialized videos on other variations of the Makarov. So if you enjoyed this, stick around for some of those. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. Thank you very much for watching.